whispers beneath the sand beneath the golden plains of Giza, where tourists snap photos and the wind hums softly over the pyramids. There lies something that does not belong in the light. It sits far below the causeway between the Great Sphinx and the second pyramid of Khafre, a pit in the earth that drops almost 100 feet straight down into limestone bedrock. They call it the Osiris Shaft, and for those who've descended into it, it's less like archaeology and more like trespassing into someone else's dream. Those who've gone down describe the air as thick and heavy, as though time itself stagnates there. There's no sound, no wind, only the faint hiss of dripping water and the smell of stone that hasn't breathed for thousands of years. It isn't the depth that frightens you. It's the feeling that the deeper you go, the further you drift from the world you know. The story of the Osiris Shaft doesn't begin with its discovery, but with a whisper that goes back nearly 2.5 millennia. Around 450 BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus traveled through Egypt, chronicling everything he saw: temples, kings, rituals, and strange legends. Yet one detail in his writings stood apart. He spoke of a hidden tomb beneath the Giza plateau, a chamber surrounded by water, with an island of stone at its heart. Upon that island, he said, lay a coffin, a resting place for the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld. Most scholars dismissed it as fantasy. Herodotus was famous for his flair for drama. An underground lake beneath Giza, an island tomb for a god. Egyptologists rolled their eyes, chalking it up to myth. And yet, throughout the centuries, the people who lived near Giza continued to tell stories. Stories of hollow ground, of wells that led to nowhere, of strange echoes beneath the sand. Travelers wrote of tunnels that filled with dark water, of strange breezes that seemed to rise from beneath their feet. No one could prove it, but the stories wouldn't die. Then, in 1933, the desert gave up one of its secrets. Egyptian archaeologist Salim Hassan, one of the most respected excavators of his time, was leading a dig near the causeway of Khafre's pyramid when one of his workers noticed a depression in the ground. Beneath a thin crust of sand, they found a narrow opening carved straight into the rock. It wasn't large, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but when they dropped a torch, the light seemed to fall endlessly before flickering out. At first, Hassan thought it was an old well. Egypt was littered with them, and most led nowhere. But when his team began clearing the sand and lowering themselves in by rope, they realized this wasn't a simple shaft. The walls were too smooth, the geometry too deliberate. Someone had carved this with precision and purpose. 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a small chamber, and below that, another shaft plunged even deeper. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt. The air grew colder, damper. The rock walls were slick with condensation. At one point, they hit a pool of black water that shimmered in their torchlight. And though they couldn't see the bottom, they could feel, beneath their boots, a faint vibration, as if something vast and unseen moved in the rock below. It was eerily similar to the story Herodotus had written centuries earlier: a tomb beneath the earth, surrounded by water and guarded by darkness. But the Osiris Shaft wasn't ready to give up its secrets easily. Every day, Hassan's crew pumped water out of the shaft, and every night it returned. Groundwater from the Nile seeped in faster than they could remove it. Pumps clanked, gears rattled, and the desert swallowed their progress. It became a battle between man and the elements. 4 years passed, and the deeper they went, the more the site fought back. Some workers refused to go down after claiming they heard whispers echoing from the lower chamber. Voices carried through stone. Others swore they saw faint lights flicker beneath the water, though no lamps were lit. By 1939, exhausted and defeated, Hassan halted the dig. He'd mapped what he could: a vertical shaft nearly 30 meters deep, multiple chambers carved into bedrock, and traces of burial activity from the 26th dynasty around 600 BCE. He found human bones, bits of pottery, and a few stone sarcophagi wedged into alcoves, but nothing resembling Herodotus's mythical lake tomb. He concluded the site was a later construction, a kind of reused burial complex. Impressive, yes, but not supernatural. Yet even Hassan couldn't explain its precision, its engineering, or why the lower chambers were built so deep, far beyond what was practical for an ordinary burial. He left behind careful notes, sketches, and photographs, and a quiet warning in his report. "It is," he wrote, "a place not made for the living." And so, the shaft was sealed, the sand reclaimed it, and for decades the world forgot. Tourists flocked to the pyramids, unaware that just a few hundred feet beneath them, a vertical labyrinth slept. Local children used the upper shaft as a swimming hole during hot summers. The water was cool, the echoes thrilling. They called it Bir el Gufran, the well of forgiveness. It might have stayed forgotten if not for one man, Dr. Zahi Hawass. In 1999, Hawass, then Egypt's director of antiquities, decided to reopen the Osiris Shaft. Armed with modern pumps, floodlights, and a small army of technicians, he descended into the darkness that had defeated Selim Hassan more than 60 years before. "This is the first time anyone has excavated beneath the causeway," he said. "And maybe, just maybe, we will find what Herodotus described." The deeper they went, the more the old myths seemed to awaken. The first chamber was small and bare, its walls raw limestone, no inscriptions, no paintings, just emptiness. It didn't feel like a tomb, it felt like a threshold. Below it, the second level was worse: sarcophagi, bones, and a thick layer of black resin clinging to the stone. And below that, something even stranger: water, endless, black, and still. Hawass's team shone their lights into it, and the beams reflected back like glass. Floating on the surface were fragments of stone and bits of what looked disturbingly like bone. Beneath the water, their instruments detected something massive. A rectangular shape, roughly 10 tons in weight, resting on what seemed to be a stone platform. The world above had long dismissed Herodotus's story of an underground lake and a sarcophagus on an island. But now, for the first time in recorded history, that legend wasn't just words. It was something tangible. The Osiris Shaft had been real all along, but what it was, and who had built it, remained a riddle. Because what Hawass found didn't fit the Egypt everyone thought they knew. There were no hieroglyphs, no royal seals, no mummified kings. The deeper he went, the less it looked like a tomb, and the more it felt like a machine. A structure built to make you feel something, not to house something. A myth carved into stone. A legend turned into an experience. And if that was true, then the question wasn't who was buried here, but what was meant to be awakened here. The answers, whatever they were, lay in the levels below. The descent into silence that no light could fully pierce. The descent into silence, the second descent into the Osiris Shaft, feels less like an archaeological expedition and more like an initiation. The first chamber had been unsettling enough. A blank cube carved from limestone, stripped of the familiar comfort of hieroglyphs and art. But below that silence waited something else, something older, darker, and less eager to be known. When Dr. Zahi Hawass and his team prepared to move deeper, the air was already changing. It grew thick, damp, metallic. The sound of their voices began to collapse in on itself, as if the stone swallowed every word. Even seasoned excavators described it as oppressive, like being inside the lungs of the earth, one said. There was no wind, no motion, only the hollow echo of their own breath. A narrow wooden ladder stretched downward into the dark. Each rung creaked like a warning. The limestone walls, slick with moisture, reflected their flashlights in ghostly streaks. They climbed carefully, gripping the sides, aware that a single misstep could mean plunging into a black void 30 meters deep. 6 meters below the first chamber, the team's boots touched stone again. What their lights revealed didn't belong in the tidy textbooks of Egyptology. This chamber, the second level of the Osiris Shaft, was larger, rectangular, and unnervingly symmetrical. The floor was carved so precisely that even after thousands of years underwater, its corners met at perfect right angles. The air was colder, heavy with an almost sweet, resinous odor, the scent of bitumen and embalming oils clinging to the walls. The light from their torches hit something massive on the left, a stone sarcophagus, wedged so tightly into a niche that it looked as if the rock itself had grown around it. Another one stood opposite it, both unmarked, both enormous. These were not delicate coffins meant for royal mummies, they were blocks of death weighing more than 10 tons each. Even with today's machinery, lowering them through the narrow shaft above would be almost impossible. There were no inscriptions, no prayers, no cartouches identifying the dead. The lids were smooth, untouched by chisel or paint. They were, in every sense, anonymous. That was the first alarm. In Egypt, even the humblest burials carried inscriptions invoking protection or guidance into the afterlife. Words were power, the bridge between the living and the dead. To strip them away was unthinkable. And yet here, in this hidden world, everything was wordless. The second alarm came underfoot. As the team spread out, their boots crunched on something brittle. At first they assumed it was pottery, fragments of jars or ritual offerings. But when they stooped to look, they froze. The floor wasn't littered with clay. It was scattered with human bones. But these weren't full skeletons. The remains were partial, shattered, mismatched. Right arms, right ribs, right legs, never the left. A forensic expert brought in later confirmed what their eyes already knew. This wasn't random decay. It was deliberate arrangement. Whoever placed these bones here had selected them, the right sides of bodies only, and left the others behind. The symmetry was terrifying. For Egyptologists, the implications were profound. Ancient Egyptian religion was built on wholeness. The belief that the body must remain intact for the soul to survive eternity. The process of mummification itself was a ritual of restoration. Every organ, every limb, even the hair was sacred. To cut, break, or separate was to destroy the person's chance at eternal life. So why here, in a place carved with impossible precision, were human beings reduced to half of themselves? The answer, if it could be called that, was mythic. The god Osiris, lord of the underworld, was said to have been murdered by his jealous brother Set, dismembered into 14 pieces and scattered across Egypt. His wife Isis, through divine devotion, gathered those fragments and restored him, resurrecting the first god to die and rise again. His dismemberment became the template for Egyptian resurrection, the cycle of decay and renewal that defined their entire faith. And suddenly, the pieces fit, the bones, the silence, the black resin dripping from the sarcophagi. It was all a ritual echo, a symbolic reenactment of Osiris's own dismemberment and rebirth. Every detail in the chamber began to feel deliberate. The thick, tar-like substance smeared on the sarcophagi wasn't random decay. Samples analyzed later revealed a mixture of beeswax, cedar oil, resins, and bitumen, the same substances used in embalming, but applied here not to flesh but to stone. Black, the sacred color of Osiris, the color of fertile Nile soil, of resurrection. The sarcophagi weren't just containers, they were symbols. Vessels transformed into the very body of the god. Standing there, surrounded by bones and stones soaked in black resin, the archaeologists couldn't escape the feeling that they were inside a ritual, not a tomb. The chamber's design seemed to confirm it. Every niche was aligned with mathematical precision. The corners matched celestial points, and the symmetry suggested more than craftsmanship. It hinted at purpose. One of the sarcophagi was jammed into a recess, blocking a narrow passage leading further east. Almost like a door sealed on purpose, a barrier meant to keep something, or someone, from going deeper. But if this chamber wasn't a burial, then what was it? Hawass believed it was a kind of cenotaph, a symbolic tomb for Osiris himself, not a human king. Others weren't so sure. Some archaeologists felt that the precision, the scale, and the strange condition of the remains pointed to ritual activity, possibly performed by priests reenacting the myth of Osiris's death and resurrection. Others, less willing to tread into speculation, simply called it what it felt like: disturbing. Even the sound down there defied explanation. When team members spoke, their voices didn't echo normally. Instead, the acoustics multiplied each word into layers, bouncing and blending until one voice became many, as though the chamber itself were repeating what they said. Egyptian priests believed that sound was sacred. Chanting inside tombs wasn't performance, it was a way to awaken the stone, to make it resonate with divine energy. In the Osiris Shaft, sound behaved like a living thing. When they played a single sustained note, the vibration carried through the rock like the hum of a giant tuning fork. Some described it as musical. Others called it unnerving. The shaft leading down from the second level gaped open in the corner, a black mouth that seemed to swallow light. The ladder extending into it trembled under their weight. Looking down was like staring into infinity. They could hear it, faint, rhythmic, the drip of water below. It sounded like breathing. By then, everyone was feeling it. The same creeping realization that Herodotus's myth was no longer just story. The deeper they went, the closer the ancient world seemed to whisper back. If the first chamber had been an entrance, and the second a ritual echo of dismemberment, then what waited below could only be one thing: rebirth. Still, even those who believed in the myth were unprepared for what came next. Beneath this room of bones and sarcophagi lay a chamber filled with water, still, black, and impossibly calm. The subterranean lake of legend. And at its center, resting on an island of stone, was a coffin unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. For thousands of years, it had waited. When the archaeologists finally shone their lights into that water, what they saw turned myth into reality, and history into something much harder to explain. The subterranean lake, the ladder trembled with each step as the archaeologists descended toward the third and deepest chamber of the Osiris Shaft. 30 meters below the sunlit sands of Giza, the air no longer smelled of dust or limestone. It smelled of earth and water, heavy with minerals, as if they were walking into the lungs of the planet itself. The torches flickered in the thick humidity. Each drop of condensation that fell from the ceiling echoed like a heartbeat in the stone. At the bottom, the narrow shaft widened suddenly, opening into a vast cavern. Their lights cut through the dark, slicing into a space that shimmered eerily. A pool of perfectly still, black water spread before them, so calm that it mirrored their lamps like liquid glass. For a moment, no one spoke. The chamber seemed to hum, faintly alive, as if something deep beneath the surface was listening. This was the moment that transformed myth into reality. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus had written of an underground tomb beneath Giza, a chamber surrounded by water, with a coffin resting on an island of stone. Scholars had mocked him for centuries. A story, they said, not a fact, a poetic embellishment. Yet here it was, exactly as he described, an island of rock rising from a subterranean lake, a massive sarcophagus resting on top. The myth had shape. The legend had bones. The archaeologists stepped closer to the edge. The water was cold, black, and seemingly bottomless. Their flashlights revealed 4 stone pillars standing around the island like sentinels. The reflection of the beams bounced from the pillars to the ceiling and back again, scattering ghostly light through the chamber. Everything about the place felt deliberate, built not just to exist, but to create an experience. And at the center of it all sat the sarcophagus. It was enormous, roughly 15 tons of solid granite, its lid crusted with mineral deposits from centuries submerged. The surface bore no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no names, no prayers. It was mute stone, yet somehow eloquent. Its silence was deafening. Zahi Hawass himself descended into the water to examine it. The archaeologists followed, wading slowly, their boots sinking into mud. The chill struck their bones instantly. Each movement sent ripples shivering across the mirrored surface, breaking the perfect reflection of the stone island. "It's not a tomb," one whispered. "It's a ritual." For ancient Egyptians, water wasn't just water, it was creation itself. In their cosmology, the world was born from the Nun, the primeval flood, an infinite sea of darkness that predated the earth. From that chaos, the first mound of land rose, and upon it life began. To stand here, chest deep in black water beneath the ground, was to walk back into the myth of creation. The cavern wasn't designed to fight the water, it was meant to hold it. Every drop here was symbolic. The sarcophagus on the island represented Osiris, the god torn apart and resurrected. The water surrounding it was the Nun, the chaos he conquered to return to life. And the pillars encircling it stood for the god's backbone, the Dijad, symbol of stability and rebirth. Together, they formed a living diagram of Egyptian resurrection theology, rendered not in papyrus and paint, but in stone, geometry, and water. The acoustics of the cavern amplified everything. A whisper turned into a chorus. The drip of water multiplied, spiraling around the chamber until it became rhythm, pulse, heartbeat. Some members of the team reported dizziness, a strange sense of vibration in their bones. One said it felt like the chamber itself was humming. The walls seemed to bend sound, shaping it into something musical and haunting. It was as if the place had been designed to make you feel eternity. They opened the sarcophagus with careful effort, half expecting to find bones, artifacts, or at least the remnants of a burial. Instead, they found nothing. Empty stone, smooth, cold, and untouched. It wasn't a tomb, it was a symbol. A cenotaph, a ritual vessel for the god Osiris, meant not to house the dead but to simulate resurrection. To the Egyptians, this would not have been madness. The Osiris cult that spread during the Old Kingdom treated myth as performance, faith as architecture. The story of Osiris wasn't simply told, it was enacted, repeated, made real. Priests would relive his death and rebirth in festivals that echoed across Egypt. The Osiris Shaft appeared to be that idea cast in limestone, a space where the living descended into the underworld, crossed the waters of death, and stood before the god's empty vessel, a mirror ritual of rebirth. The deeper the team looked, the less the chamber resembled a tomb, and the more it looked like a machine of myth. It wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. The water levels, according to geological surveys, fluctuated with the annual flood of the Nile. Each year, the water would rise, then fall, mirroring the cosmic rhythm of death and renewal. The very landscape breathed in sync with Egyptian cosmology. And then came the impossible question: how was this even built? The shaft leading here is so narrow that two people can barely descend side by side. The sarcophagus itself weighs tens of tons. The pillars, massive blocks carved from granite and basalt, are cut and placed with surgical accuracy. To move such materials into a hole this deep without modern machinery borders on the impossible. No cranes, no pulleys, no space to maneuver. Either the stones were lowered inch by inch using techniques that modern engineers can't replicate, or they were carved in place, an act requiring tools and precision beyond copper chisels and manpower. The logistics defy logic. And yet the evidence stands. As the team documented the site, another realization took shape. The black resin coating parts of the walls and sarcophagus wasn't random. Chemical analysis showed it to be a deliberate blend of imported resins, oils, and bitumen, a mix expensive and sacred in ancient Egypt. Black, to the Egyptians, was not the color of death. It was the color of fertility and rebirth, the color of the Nile's silt after flooding. To coat these stones in black was to give them divine life, to charge them with Osiris's essence. Everything here was alive with meaning. The geometry, the materials, even the silence. And still, the most haunting feature wasn't the engineering or the mythic symmetry. It was the emptiness. A sarcophagus that never held a body, a tomb without a name, a chamber flooded on purpose. It felt as though the builders had intended it to remain unfinished, a place forever waiting for the god to return. Some modern researchers believe the Osiris Shaft might have been a ritual portal, a space where initiates symbolically died, passed through the waters of the underworld and emerged reborn, a living echo of Osiris's journey. If true, it means this structure wasn't just architecture, it was theology in 3 dimensions designed to manipulate the senses: sound, touch, light, and fear, to make participants feel the myth with their entire bodies. Standing in that cavern, the archaeologists felt time collapse. The torches flickered across the water, their reflections forming the illusion of motion beneath the surface, like something shifting in the dark. The pillars cast long, trembling shadows that danced like spirits. The hum of the pumps mingled with the rhythm of dripping water, blurring past and present into one eternal vibration. And somewhere between logic and superstition, between science and story, every man down there understood the same chilling truth. They were standing in a place where myth had become architecture. When they finally climbed back up the ladder, leaving the black lake behind, each step upward felt heavier, as though the shaft itself resisted their departure. When they emerged into the sunlight, blinking against the glare of the desert, it was as if they had crawled out of another world. But for archaeologists, questions are heavier than stone. If the chamber wasn't a tomb, then what was it built for? If the sarcophagus never held a body, who was meant to occupy it? And if the Osiris Shaft could merge myth and matter so perfectly, what else might lie beneath Giza, still waiting to blur the line between gods and men? The answers, it seemed, were buried not in the past, but in the next descent, into the ritual machine itself. The ritual machine, when the team emerged from the Osiris Shaft that day, their boots caked in black mud and the chill of the underground still clinging to their skin.